Thank you so much, Rachel. It's a pleasure to be with you all. I'm really thrilled to be here. It's fun to be in the Googleplex. So here's the situation. We have the best technology that the world has ever seen, has ever had, to deal with conflict. And yet, family conflict abounds, workplace conflict, community conflict, international conflict. What's the situation? We've got principled negotiation, we've got diplomacy, we've got win-win technologies. What's wrong? What's missing? I'm arguing today we need new conflict technology. There are at least two types of conflicts, so we're going to talk about two of them and then we're going to focus on one. There's routine conflict, right? I'm hot, you're cold, I want the window open, you want the window closed. How are we going to solve this? I'm calling that, it's really a mainframe problem. And it can be and has been solved over the last many years. Those kinds of problems are solved by conflict resolution. It can be resolved, right? We figure out how to have a win-win solution, and we can figure that out. Different from routine conflict is what I'm calling difficult conflict. This is the kind of conflict that comes up again and again. No matter how many times we try to resolve it, it just seems to keep coming up. I'm calling this more like the cloud. It's more of a cloud-like problem. It's a complex problem. Array of different factors cause these kinds of problems. And we need to master these kinds of problems. Conflict resolution is not adequate to address these kinds of difficult conflicts, complex conflicts. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to introduce to you 7 practices that you can use, that you can practice to master conflict. We're going to rip through them, because I normally spend at least 3 days going deep into each one, but we're going to rip through them today so that you have a sense of what's the entirety of this set of 7 practices. And so for those left-brainers out there amongst us, myself included, you'll be happy. You'll see we're going to walk through them in a logical, sequential order. For the rest of us, I'm going to tell you a story, okay? So for the last 20 years, I've been consulting, coaching senior leaders, CEOs, and their senior teams to help them deal with very difficult conflicts like the ones we're going to be talking about today. And I've worked with people across many different kinds of industries, particularly focusing on high tech, professional services, financial services. That's my work. And so I'm going to be drawing on one story. It's actually a composite of a couple of different clients of mine from recent years to protect the innocent. So don't try to guess who these people are. And we're going to walk through the 7 practices using this story as an example so you can see how it works. In addition to that, I want this material to be really relevant to you. So before we move on, take a moment, and I want you to think of a difficult conflict in your life that you are aware of. It could be one that you yourself are currently experiencing. It could be one that you are helping other people in your life deal with. Or it could be one that you're simply aware of from watching the news. So just take a minute. For those of you watching online, take a moment, write it down. And in a minute, I'm going to ask you to turn to someone sitting next to you and talk about it. But just take a minute and think of, write down a difficult conflict that's important to you. So we can really ground ourselves in what are we talking about here? What's important to you? And it could be family, workplace, national, international, community. Okay. So now turn to somebody sitting next to you, for those of you in the room, and you can make your example generic if you don't feel comfortable talking to them about exactly all the details, or you can say pass and just listen to them, but take a minute and tell the other person or listen to them talk about their difficult conflict that came to mind. So just take a minute and do that. All right, great. Coming back together. So I want to hear a couple of examples. Can anyone in like a sentence or two, tell me what did you say? What is a difficult conflict that's important to you? Yes?
No matter what happens on Tuesday, a large event.
Thank you. Yes, I had meant to say earlier, actually, that one very obvious example of difficult conflict that we in this country are facing this week as we head into the presidential election is exactly what you just said, right? We're in the midst of one of the most conflictual presidential elections we've ever seen. Thank you. Who else? What's an example of a difficult conflict? Might be from your own personal life, might be from work. So you have, inside of yourself, you have a conflict going on about, well, should I raise it this way or should I raise it that way? Or maybe this third thing is something I should say. Yes, thank you. So you have actually conflict going on inside of yourself about how to deal with a conflict that you have going on with somebody else. Makes sense. Any other brave people? One more example, just to ground us?
Yeah,
yes.
Like a Google.
Okay, so cultural differences. Yeah. So there are cultural differences among people who work at Google in different countries. Is that what you're saying?
No,
tell me more what you mean.
It's made like a
Google versus the Chinese government.
kind of a.
Okay, great, got it. There are regulations that the Chinese government has placed on Google, and Google has to figure out how to deal with this. Excellent example. One of the most, right, that's a great example of a cloud complex conflict. Thank you, okay. So we have a sense of what are we talking about here, right? How many people have ever felt like conflict is mastering you? Anyone felt that way, right? This conflict is really mastering me, not the other way around. So we are going to be talking about how can we turn that around and master conflict. So as I said, we're going to be talking about 7 practices, and here they are. Map it out. Accept what is. Identify your values. We'll talk more about what specific values we're talking about. Transform negative emotions. Envision optimal possible outcomes. Prevent unintended negative consequences, and take courageous pattern-breaking action. Okay, and the purpose, why are we going to do these practices? The purpose is so that you can live at your highest potential and master conflict. That's what it's about. So we're going to take each of these in turn, and we're going to apply this story that I'm about to tell you to this conflict. Number 1, practice number 1. Map it out. So often in difficult conflicts, it seems like we're dealing with just me, us versus them, right? China versus Google. But in actuality, it's much more complex than that. And so paradoxically, the first piece of advice about how to deal with difficult conflict is not to do anything at all. It's actually to take a step back and observe the situation. Observe the situation. And one of the best ways that I know how to do that is to draw a map for yourself. I'm going to show you in a minute. Well, here it is. Right, this is one of the most complex maps that has probably ever been drawn to show a conflict situation. The US military drew this map of the situation in Afghanistan. And I show you this map because it's really an exaggerated example of what I'm talking about taking a situation that might look like one side versus another side, and then really seeing what's the complex situation that's going on here. So I told you I'm going to tell you this story about a CEO and a salesperson that he works with. The organization is a high-tech startup company in New York City. Bob is the CEO. Sally is his top salesperson. And they've been friends for 15 years. They're co-founders of this firm. They founded the firm 8 years ago. I'm Bob's coach. He hired me. I've been working with him for about a year and a half. And about 6 months before I started working with him, he and Sally had a big, big blow-up screaming match on a street corner in Manhattan. Why, you ask? Well, it's because they were talking about Sally's compensation package. This was something that Bob had wanted to bring up with her for a very long time, right? Just like your example, what am I going to say? So he was probably like you, going back and forth in his mind of, should I say this, should I say that? And it took him a long time to even raise the issue with her, because he knew from past experience that any time he did, she got very upset. And sure enough, this time they went out for lunch, as they often did, near their office, casually as friends. And they're walking back from lunch to the office, and he decides to bring up the topic, and he says the words, "your compensation package," and according to him, she immediately starts screaming at him. How could you bring this up? All that. So what does he do? Screams right back. So there they are, yelling at each other on the street corner, and at some point he just says, you know what, forget it. Forget I even ever mentioned it. You can keep the package the way that it is, and that was the end of the situation. Now, what you need to know is the reason why he felt so strongly about bringing up the issue is that Sally's compensation package had not changed since the company was founded 8 years ago. And she was being compensated as if they were still back 8 years ago, but now the company has grown tremendous amounts, and according to Bob, she could just not even pick up the phone, and she would max out her commissions, right? She would make as much money as she possibly could for herself, because the company is doing lots of other things to help sell their software. So that's the situation. The other thing you need to know about Sally is that she grew up in a family where her parents didn't have a lot of money. They were quite poor. And as a result, she herself has always been very concerned about her ability to support herself. She's single. She's the primary person taking care of herself. There's no one else who can take care of her financially except for her. So she's got some worries about her own financial standing. We also have Sally's coach who's involved here. Sally's coach is a colleague of mine who works with me at my firm. And who else do we have? Can't forget about the executive team, including the CFO, who also has a stake and cares a lot about what Sally's compensation package looks like. And finally, Bob's spouse, right? She's involved here too. So what started out looking like it's just about Bob and Sally, we map it out and we see it's more complex than that. What's the ultimate purpose of doing an exercise like this? It's to see levers for change that we might not have seen otherwise. Right here, we start to see, something's going on here about Sally's upbringing. There's other people involved. The CFO might be putting pressure on Bob. All right, we're not coming up with solutions yet, but we're observing what is. The next practice is accept what is. So where the first practice, again, paradoxically, we're taking a step back rather than jumping in and doing anything. The second step is quite the same and even further, taking a step back. So this quote says, "The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result." How many of you have ever been in a conflict where you say, let's do it this way. Let's do it this way. And you just keep meeting up against resistance, right? Either they push back or they're just shut down. So you're not, regardless of how they react, it's one of those two things. They push back or they're shut down. You're not getting anywhere, right? You could say the same thing. How many people have had that experience? I can't imagine, it would, right. It's a pretty common experience. That's what we typically do. We want them to do it our way, and so we just keep on telling them, right? We might say it in 17 different ways on 17 different days, and we start to think we're actually going insane, right? You start to feel insane. So there has to be a better way. And what I'm suggesting is that it has to do with accepting the situation. Now, how do you do that? 3 things. First is accept who they are. Second, accept yourself. And third, accept the situation. So to be clear, I don't want anyone walking out of here saying, she said we should just agree with everything that they said. No, that's not what I'm talking about, right? I'm not saying you have to agree with them, and I'm not saying you have to like them. I'm just saying, can you accept what is? How do you do this? You ask 2 questions. The first question is, what do I wish were true? If I'm accepting who they are, what do I wish were true about them? So another part of this story about the CEO and his salesperson, Bob and Sally, Bob said to me at some point, you know, I just wish she wasn't so selfish. Why does she care so much about her own compensation to the exclusion of the company? She doesn't care about the company. She only cares about herself. At that point, I looked at Bob and I said, Bob, I get that you really wish she wasn't saying what she's saying, that she wasn't worried about her own financial well-being. And my question for you is, can you accept that that's what she's experiencing in life right now? She has fear about her own financial well-being, and that may be driving a lot of her behavior. Can you accept that? Okay, now all of a sudden we have some movement. What about accept yourself? What do you think Bob, the CEO, wished he had done differently? So they're on the street corner yelling at each other. He brought it up as they're walking home, walking back to the office. He backs down. What do you think he wishes about himself that he had done differently in that situation? Exactly, great, thank you. He wishes he had brought it up in a more formal place, in a meeting room, in a more formal way. Great. Yes? Great. So I heard you say 2 things. One is give her some advanced warning so that they're not just, boom, she's immediately expected to react. Give her advanced warning by sending her an email first saying, hey, let's talk about this. And also you're saying he might wish that he hadn't said it's going to change, but rather, let's talk about it. So great. He probably wishes that he had done, in fact, I know that he wishes he had done all those things, looking back. So the question for him is, can he accept that he didn't do those things? Can he accept his contributions to the problem, right? In the past, his narrative has been, it's all her fault. It's all her fault. It's all their fault. It's all China's fault, right? But can we accept the contributions that we have made to the situation as it is? That he brought it up in the middle of a street corner, that he didn't give her advanced warning, that he brought it up in a way that didn't give her a chance to even have any say in the matter at all. Can he accept his contributions and accept the situation? What do you think, thinking about yourself now for a minute, what do you think most people, what do you tend not to accept about a difficult conflict? What's hard about the situation itself? What do you wish? Yeah. You just want the uncomfortable feeling to go away. It's really uncomfortable. Most people, if you ask them, what do you wish could change about the situation? They just say, make it go away and fast, right? It never feels like I've done anything wrong. I wish they could just see that they're wrong and I'm right, and that would end it. Yeah? Exactly. Yes. Yes. It is hard. Exactly. In fact, these 7 practices, as you're already, I'm sure, noticing, this is hard work. So don't let anyone tell you that this is easy, and that's why it's called mastering conflict, because it's like earning your black belt in conflict mastery as you do these practices. So for sure, I wish it wasn't so hard. Why does it have to be so hard? Then, of course, the second question is, can I accept that it is hard? Right? That this isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And you might also ask yourself, what's unlikely to change about this situation? Right? It's unlikely that she's going to go back and have a different childhood, Sally. It's unlikely that the CFO is going to stop putting pressure on the CEO to have this conversation, right? Those things are unlikely to change. So can we live with them? Can we learn how to master conflict and live with what is, rather than just keep wishing that it somehow would just work itself out and go away? Because unless we master it, it's not likely to. Third practice, identify your values. And we have 3 different kinds of values here to identify. In most difficult, in all difficult conflicts, there's something running the show, running the conflict, that I'm calling taboo values. These are the things that we all care about, but we would never admit that we care about them, sometimes not even to our own selves. We are so ashamed, embarrassed about caring about these things that we won't even let ourselves go there. We'll push them down, we push them away into some shadow side of ourselves, right? We don't want to look at that. And that prevents the conflict from having any movement, any opportunity for movement out of the stuck place. Because until and unless we can take those shadow taboo values and look at them and talk about them with the other side, with other people, they're going to be running the show. So ideal values are quite the opposite. If you ask someone, what do you really care about? What drives your behavior in your life? Those are their ideal values. That's what they say is important to them. So if we think about the CEO, Bob, in this situation, what would Bob, you don't know him well, I know him well, but what do you think Bob would say are his ideal values? Thinking about the company he's created, it's this high-tech startup. What would he say are important to him? Just take a guess. I mean, you don't know him. Company interests before your own interests. Great. Yep, absolutely. Like collaborative. Great. Yes, absolutely. He cares about people. He cares about employees in his company. He's a caring person, so a value of his might be care. Yep. Great. So what's a value behind that? You said people, that they want the products and services to do well in the company. What would you call that? Maybe achievement? Great. Affinity for products.
Ambition for himself and for the company.
Great. Ambition for myself and for the company. Yeah. So you all hit it on the head, right? These are the things that I knew about him from having worked with him, is that he said, look, I'm a generous person. I take care of my employees. I'm an authentic person. People know that what I say is how I behave, and they're one and the same. And I'm a collaborative person, right? I like people to work together. That's what he said about himself. That's what he believed to be true. What about his current values? How does he actually live his life? So sometimes, for some people, if we're lucky, our ideal values and our current values are one and the same, because we're living in a way where our behavior is aligned with or matches what we say is actually important to us. For others, probably more of us, our ideal values might overlap a little bit with our current values, but we've got other things that are really driving our behavior. And for some of us, our ideal values are one set of things, and the way we live our life is a whole other set of things, right? So what do you think might be his current values? What's driving his behavior? Yeah. Yeah, so scarcity and confrontation might be running the show here. So, well, let's see. So I've got here authenticity. He is authentic, right? He says what he means. And also that he's an adventurous person too. So he's a risk taker, right? In life, somebody, taught him that risk-taking and having adventures is a good thing. And he started a firm 8 years ago, and he's an adventurous guy. What about his taboo values? And I think this is really more like what you were just saying, right? So this is a person who really wants power in his life, wants authority in his life, wants the financial stability that you were just talking about. Yet, pushes those things down because at some point along the way in his life, somebody told him it's okay to be generous, it's okay to be collaborative, it's okay to be authentic, but boy, if you ever dare tell somebody that you want power or you want authority, you want financial stability, no, you've got to be adventurous, you've got to be a risk taker. That's his profile of his values. That's what he learned along the way in his life. And so for him to come out and say, I care about power, authority, and financial stability for myself, he can't go there. And as we said before, if he can't go there for himself, if he can't admit those things to himself, they're completely undiscussable with Sally as well. So he needs to admit that these things are important to him so that he can discuss them with Sally. And then they have some place to move, right? It might be that he and Sally go, hey, actually we both care about financial stability, and that's something we actually have in common. Then you start to move more towards a more classic collaborative or win-win negotiation opportunity. Next practice. We're going to talk about emotions. Negative emotions are core to every difficult conflict. It's basically, it's impossible to have a difficult conflict without having negative emotions that come along with it. I'm suggesting here that there are 4 ways that we as humans typically respond emotionally in difficult conflicts. The more American, culturally assumed way is explode at others, right? We get angry and we aggress, either physically or verbally, or both. We aggress at others. That's how we typically think about it in this country, at least. But there's these 3 other ways as well, right? We shut down with others, right? Push, 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 boom. I'm not talking about my feelings. I'm avoiding this situation, and we'll just see what happens, but I'm going to avoid this at all costs. Something else that we don't typically talk about is that many of us actually attack ourselves. So while some of us attack the other, some of us go inside and feel so much shame and guilt. We ruminate on that. And somehow we think that that ruminating is going to make those feelings get better or go away. We're going to figure them out finally, right? But what the research tells us about ruminating, especially about negative emotions, is that it doesn't make those negative emotions go away. You don't ever figure them out. It just makes them worse, not better. And finally, for some of us, we've been taught, culture impacts this, we're so shut down, we're even shut down to ourselves. So we might be confused, we might be feeling hurt, but we don't have the names for that, and so we ourselves are just emotionally shut down. So what do we do about this? If these are our typical ways of responding, clearly none of them particularly helpful in difficult conflicts, what do? We transform them. Can anyone tell me, what do you see up on this screen? What's this a picture of? A transformer. And can you tell, it's not such a great picture, can you tell what is the transformer doing? Meditating. Yes. We have a transformer meditating. I understand that at Google, many of us around here, meditate. So I thought this would be an appropriate picture to show you. So Transformers, how many of you played with Transformers as a kid? Maybe you might still. I know, it's fun, right? So Transformers were these dolls that were action figures, really, that you would press a button or do something. My son has one. You throw it on the floor, and it turns into something else. It transforms into something else. So why am I showing you a picture of transforming meditator? It's because the Buddhists brought a 2,000-year-old technology to help us transform our emotions. Now, there are a ton of people out there in the conflict space who will tell you, rather than transform your emotions, what you want to do is you want to try to make it so that people don't experience negative emotions around you. So give them do things to help make it better, and then people won't be angry at you. But what I really want to suggest is that that's like asking you to tame a wild beast. Complex conflicts are naturally going to bring up negative emotions. So I'm not going to ask you to tamp them down or make them go away or try to do something so that other people, you can do that. You can try to make it so that other people don't get angry or don't aggress against you. But still, these negative emotions are going to arise. So what do? You sit and you let the emotions settle. And in doing that, usually what happens is those emotions have the opportunity to transform into something more constructive. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk, he talks about a glass of water. So if you're in the desert and you need to drink and you have this one last glass of water and it's muddy, it's full of mud, what do? You take the glass of water, you set it aside, you let the mud settle to the bottom, and then on the top you have the clear water to drink. And that's another metaphor, another idea. Now, what happens if you're not able to transform these emotions? You try to let them settle, and they don't. These negative emotions are still present. One thing to do is to ask yourself, what are my emotions trying to tell me? Very often, our emotions are trying to send us messages. It might be danger, or it might be opportunity. And if we're shut off to our emotions and we're not aware even of what they are, it's not possible for us to hear the wisdom in them. So I encourage you, sit, let them settle, and then listen to what they might be trying to tell you. To do or not do, say or not say. It's my quick advice about emotions. Next practice. Envision possible optimal outcomes. What do I mean by this? So often in difficult conflicts, we are looking at what happened in the past, right? Who said it? We're blaming. It's not my fault, it's all their fault. We're so focused on whose fault it is and blaming, looking at what has gone wrong, we're not at all aware of how important it is to think about the future and what we do want. So this practice is aimed at helping us look forward to the future. And there are a few recommendations that I have for best practice ways to do this. One is to use all 5 of your senses. So we typically rely on seeing and hearing. What about smelling, tasting, touch, and also our emotions, actually? So there's research that suggests that if you use all these 5 senses, plus your feelings, to visualize what you want in the future, or visualize your performance, visualize your outcomes, there's actually sports research on this, people who visualized it were as likely to achieve the outcomes they were seeking as people who actually did the practice of that sport. So visualization works. Many of us come from fractured families. Thanksgiving is around the corner, right? So what I encourage you to do is think about a Thanksgiving meal that you might be about to have and envision what could this be like without all that conflict that normally comes along with that dinner. What could it be like to be joyful and have love in the room? What would it look like? What would it sound like? What would it taste like? Can you taste the turkey? Can you smell the food wafting through the kitchen? Can you imagine what it would be like to hug and be with your friends or your family? If you can imagine it, you bet you have a much better chance of making that happen. Can you feel those feelings? Much better chance of making that happen than if you don't envision it at all. Next practice, prevent unintended negative consequences. So again, because we're often so focused on what went wrong in the past, and we're so in action mode, just trying to fix it, right? People talked about, well, should I do this or should I do that? And so we're just like all over the place often trying to make things work. And what happens is we're not thinking ahead about the possible consequences of our own actions. We're not thinking about how we might be contributing to the situation. So has anyone heard of Susie Welch? Anyone know who's Susie Welch? Anyone know? All right, so she is the spouse of Jack Welch, who was the former CEO of General Electric. She is the former Harvard Business Review editor-in-chief. She interviewed him for an article she was writing. That's how they met. And she also happens to have written a book a few years ago called 10-10-10. 10 minutes, 10 months, 10 years, a life-transforming idea. And the idea in her book is quite simple. It's when you have an important decision to make in life, it can be really helpful to think about the impact of that decision on yourself, not just today, 10 minutes from now, but also 10 months from now and 10 years from now. Really fantastic idea. The idea here in this practice is building on that, and it's not just to stretch the time horizon, but also stretch out who are you thinking about your impact of your behavior on. So typically, we think about on yourself now. We think about what am I about to do? How is my behavior that I'm about to take going to impact me now? So I'm saying, think about it. How is it going to impact you midterm, and how is it going to impact you long term? But also, ask yourself, how is it going to impact the other side, now, midterm, and long term? And don't stop there, because there's some other very important people, as we discovered doing the map exercise, who are impacted by your behavior as well, which is everyone else involved in that conflict, right? Others now, midterm, and long term. So if we back up, let's go back in time and think about Bob. If he thinks about the impact of his raising the idea on the street corner, on him now, he's like, wow, that's so great, I got it off my chest, right? Him midterm, all right, cool. So now we've talked about it, and probably, we're going to change her compensation package. And long term, the company's financial well-being will be good. But what about on Sally now? What do you think? If he took the time to think, I'm going to bring this up on the street corner, you said it before, what's the impact on Sally of doing that? Right, she's fearful, she's angry, she gets caught off guard. And what's the impact on Sally over the medium term? Yeah. Absolutely, right? Now she's completely shut down, conversation finished. Long term? Absolutely. Trust is damaged, their relationship is damaged, for sure. That is exactly what happened. What about others? So thinking about the whole company, the executive team, the CFO, each of their families. What about others? What's the impact on the company of his behavior? He brings it up on the street corner now. So for the company, so it's negative all around. And for the CFO, for the rest of the company, also negative, right? Because now the CFO has been pressuring the CEO to have this conversation, and now the whole thing got shut down, right? Midterm, also shut down. Company's losing money. Sally's making a ton of money, and company is losing money. And long term, same thing. So can be really helpful. You want to think about yourself as, like a chess master. When you're playing, how many people play chess out there? Yeah? So when you play chess, right, one of the things that you have to do is you've got to be thinking a few steps ahead. And that's the same idea here, is be training yourself, and this is a practice, it's not easy, for sure not easy. It is a practice to train yourself, just like a chess master does, to think a few steps ahead about what's going to be the implications of my actions today on all these other folks over the long term. That's the idea. And the reason to do this, obviously, right, the purpose is it'll prevent you from doing things that are going to cause problems for you. That might even, it's going to prevent disasters, basically. And it's going to set you up for success. It's going to help you maximize the outcomes that you're looking to achieve. Final practice. Take courageous pattern-breaking action. What do I mean by pattern-breaking action? And I'll ask that as a real question. What do you think I mean, pattern-breaking? What does that mean? You got it. You got it. Something you typically won't do as part of your normal routine. You're breaking the pattern in your behavior. And how do you know that you're breaking a pattern in your behavior of how you typically do things? It feels really uncomfortable. It basically sucks, right? You feel like, what is going on here? This is so weird, so strange. I don't understand what's happening. That's how you know you're doing courageous pattern-breaking action. So it's going to feel weird. Unlike many of the previous practices that we just went through, particularly the first one, the second one, right? Accept what is, observe what is. The sixth one, which was just think ahead about your actions and be like a chess master and think ahead. This final practice is all about action. So it's great. You have to think ahead. And if you're only analyzing, if you're only thinking ahead, right? That's what, when we started out, you said, well, I'm in my own head and I'm thinking, should I do this or should I do that? If you end there, guaranteed failure, right? Because you haven't done anything, well, not guaranteed, but most likely, sometime, every once in a while, avoiding, helps, but not in difficult situations, not in difficult conflicts. Avoiding doesn't usually help. It usually only makes things worse. So, couple of pieces of advice about how to take courageous pattern-breaking action. First one is mini experiments. What do I mean by that? So, a different CEO who I was consulting to a couple of years ago, he got feedback. It was my job to give him the feedback. I collected feedback from his direct reports, people who reported to him, and I delivered this report to him. And the main message of the report was, you don't listen to your people. They don't feel heard. And he said, uncharacteristically for him, he said, you know what? You're right. I don't. And then he said, I never have listened to anyone. That's how I got where I am today. On the playground as a kid, I used to tell everyone else what to do, and they listened to me. And that's how I've always been. So in that moment, I said to him, first of all, kudos to you for acknowledging your behavior and that it got you to where you are. Today, these people are ready to quit on you. So you're thinking about, how can I do this differently? My advice to him was, do mini experiments. Don't expect that all of a sudden you're going to just start listening to everybody. Go home, be with your partner, your spouse, be with your kids, and listen to them once a day. Only once a day. Make it your practice to listen to them. You might tell them what you think you just heard them say. You might check that you heard them right. Do whatever you need to do to make sure that you listen to those people. And then come back and tell me, I'm your coach, tell me how it went. That's an example of start small, once a day, and start safe. Do it at home, test it out, see how it goes. Mini experiments. Second idea comes to us from Nike. Just do it, right? Don't hesitate. You gotta just, at some point, right? At some point, you gotta just do it. Has anyone ever done an AIDS ride or a 3-day breast cancer walk? Anybody here? No, you should do it. It's really great experience. Maybe, kind of, almost did it. So a man named Dan Pallotta was the original founder of the AIDS rides and the 3-day breast cancer walks with Avon. And I did one of the breast cancer walks many years ago. And Dan Pallotta was there. He gave a speech at the closing ceremonies. And in that speech, he said that he had a friend named Alan. And Alan was the kind of person who didn't hesitate when the right thing needed to be done. He just did it. So Alan used to drive around in his car with blankets and food in the back seat. And when he saw somebody on the street who needed help, he gave them what they needed. That's what I'm asking of you today, is that at a certain point, You gotta just do it. So I wanna leave you with an invitation and with a promise. The invitation is to actually put these practices into play. Practice them in your real life. It's not gonna be easy. I can guarantee you that. It's gonna make you go deep. You're gonna go deep. I'm asking you to look at things that you have not wanted to look at about yourself, in your life, about others. And yet, the promise that I can make you is that as you do those things, as you practice those practices, you will come to experience what it's like to be a conflict master. You'll walk into your office and you'll be thrilled to be there, to be with the people at work and at home who bring you love and joy. And what's even better is that it's contagious. So as you master conflict, you lead the way for others as well. You allow them to master conflict in their own lives too. And in that way, you build masterful teams, masterful organizations, communities, masterful families. It's all right there for you. So stay in conversation with each other, with me. Please let me know how your mini experiments go. I want to hear about it. Stay in conversation, stay in practice. I have a more specific invitation for you. I'm actually teaching in a couple of weekends, but it's sold out. But the next one is March 4th through 6th, 2017, the weekend workshop where we go much deeper into each of these 7 practices. It's at Columbia University. So that's my invitation to you as well. Feel free to come and let me know or email me for those of you watching online. Happy to get you connected and registered. Thank you so much. It's been a total pleasure being with you all today.
I had a question around time frame. So that's a lot of steps, and I like the process. But what would you say is like so in that situation with Bob, like what time frame does that really all take? Because it sounds like a lot.
Yeah. So he's on the street corner and he's in the middle of yelling back, and you're saying, what does he do then, right? Yeah. So typically, as I said, emotions, negative emotions, are involved in almost every difficult conflict. So often, it's actually a matter of us being aware of what's happening in our body. How many of you would say you're on a regular basis aware of what's happening in your body? All right, cool, great. Are you guys from the meditation, the mindfulness group? That's awesome. Right, usually, so maybe about 10% of the room. It's difficult work. So in order to get in touch with what's going on, you have to first be in practice being aware of sitting, feeling. What am I feeling? What's going on? What am I feeling? Typically, emotions are linked to bodily sensations that we have. So if I know that when I get angry, my face starts to turn hot and red, and my heart starts to beat faster, and my pulse, and my hands get all tingly or something. That is my cue to take a couple deep breaths, calm it down, try to either not yell back in the first place or stop yelling in the midst of it. And I would say when you're stuck in the moment, the emotions is the place to go to really calm yourself down. And you can say to someone, look, I'm not proud of what is happening here, and I'd like us to take a break. Can we take a break, cool it off, and come back in an hour, tomorrow, next week? Let's think this through and really come back and have a better conversation. So that's just a quick answer to your question. But for sure, these practices are, and the reason why we call them practices is because they're meant to be practiced over time to help prevent you from getting in difficult conflicts in the first place. Or use them after you just had a big blowout with someone or something, or you're ruminating about something. Use them as a way to ask yourself, how could I get back on track here? How can I get back on track? But you do need the time to sit quietly, so taking a break is a good idea when you're in the midst. So the question is, how do you identify your taboo values? And once you've identified them, what do you do with that? Well, first of all, for some of you, we made some printed copies of a sheet that walks you through the 7 practices. And on that sheet, there's a list of values. So it's a little cheat sheet. And I recommend using either this list that I've provided for you or some list of values. I'm sure if you go online, you can find a list of what are typical values and look through them. And the advice is make your list of what are the taboo values in my life, generally speaking, right? We all have them. So you want to ask yourself, what are things, like for example, power and authority were true for this CEO. For some people, it has to do with affluence. Money is a big one. Independence. We all have different taboo values. And in fact, I've done this exercise with many, many groups where we notice that some people's taboo values show up on other people's ideal values and vice versa, depending on how you grew up, what messages you got sent. So it's deep introspective work. You might work with a friend or a colleague or a coach to help you identify what might be some of these taboo values for me. And then the second part of your question was, and what do I do with them once I know what they are? Really 2 things. The first is admit to yourself that this is true for you, and that you may not be proud of it. And then the second piece is, can you find a way to make this discussable with the other person? So, you might say to them, look, I just realized for the first time in my life that it's very hard for me to admit I actually do need autonomy in my life, or I do need to feel powerful or to feel respected. Those are important to me. I've always thought that those are not things I should want, but now I get that I want them. And I'm telling you this because I want to fess up to my part in this conflict. My part is that I wasn't clear with myself, and so there was no way I could have been clear with you that those were things that were important to me. And they've been driving my behavior in this conflict, and I'm not proud of it. And then see how they respond to that. My hunch, what I've seen to be true for so many of my clients, is that people respond really well to that kind of conversation because they see how authentic and how honest you're being with them, and that you're taking responsibility, right? Like we're going from the place of it's all your fault, I have nothing to do with it, to wow, I really get how much I've contributed here. Is that helpful?
And one last question. Yeah. If you go back to the previous slide, I wanted to ask you about the research that had gone through to, create these 7 steps, because I'm wondering, like, is this the most parsimonious set? Because if I were thinking to myself what the procedures I would take, I would want to, understand myself, understand others. I would want to maybe calm my own emotions and then, breach the topic in a tactful manner with the other person in different ways. Are these other steps, like envisioning the optimal possible outcome or mapping out some taboo values, is that even necessary as steps?
It's a great question. So first of all, let me say thank you for your challenge. I love parsimony, and I think it's a great challenge. Second of all, I hope it's possible that I did say the word steps, but I'm calling these practices because they're not I presented them in a sequential order, but they're not meant to be that you must go through each one of these 7 steps. They're not steps at all, actually. They're practices that you can cultivate in order to become a master of difficult conflicts. And so for some conflicts, it may be that what you just said, there are 3 pieces here that are really helpful for you, and go for it if that's true for you. For other conflicts or for other people, other practices might be more helpful to them. And I take your challenge. I'm in the midst of writing the book, so it's not done yet. But I'll say one more thing that might be helpful for you in answering the question, which is these 7 practices are what I have seen is missing from the existing conflict literature, scholarly literature, and practical literature and practice. So some of the best-selling books of the last 4 decades did an amazing job of helping people deal with these routine conflicts, and yet they never talked about, envision what it could be like. They talk about create options that will work for both parties, but I think this takes that idea in a different direction. This takes that idea like another step further and say, really get yourself to imagine what it could be like. So it may be that you already do that and you don't, and that practice doesn't speak to you, but.